Is this episode 4, Frank?
It's episode, yeah, I think episode 4.
Wow.
Episode 4.
Of the essentials of building a brand.
The essentials of building a brand. Yes. Or a own little Netflix series, hopefully one day.
Maybe one day. Frank's essentials of building a brand. So we've already had 3 videos. Can you remind me what they were and kind of recap them a little bit?
Yeah, totally. So we talked about, I can give an overview too, because I know we basically took a little break last week, is we're working through the essentials of building a brand in sequential order. So it's like, hey, when we go to build a brand, where do we start and what process do we go through to finish? So the first 3 we basically worked through in order. The first one is purpose and vision. So that's, why you exist beyond money. And it's really important for companies to be led by that and brands to be built off of that. The second is brand identity. So this is looking very much at your company and identifying who you want to be aspirationally based on kind of like the core strengths that you have today and kind of the core identity that you have and how you want to build that up into the future. And then we also talked about growth goals, and that's a little bit more, tangible. What do we need to achieve? What do we want to achieve in the next, 9 to 18 month kind of segment to, make what we want to happen. And it just provides objective criteria to measuring success as a brand. Right? So those are the first 3 things we talked about. And today we are talking about category of brands. So I'm excited for that.
Me too. Well, as we dive into that, like category obviously can mean a lot of different things when it comes to brand. Specifically, what does category mean?
Yeah, so category it's pretty popular now. It's generally just a part of positioning, and it's not as complex as it sounds, but it certainly is something to keep in mind. So when you think through category, it's really just helping your customer or your audience understand who your company is and what you do by relating it to something else that they're familiar with, right? I feel like this concept is very popular right now, like tech startup world, as people are trying to be category creators, right? Leading a new category, whatever it is. And so most of this is going to be most relevant to someone in that environment to a certain extent. But one, it's a critical part of brand building, no matter what stage you're at, just to be aware of the category that you're in. Mostly because that is going to drive a lot around your strategy, right? What environment do we play in? Where do we play a role? And for customers to understand that, as well as how you might be able to leverage that as a company to innovate and grow. And there's certainly, we'll talk about kind of the subcategories or the types of categories that you can play in. And there's certainly, key differences, but there's also some overlap. It's not a perfect science, just helpful to really understand what those are and understand how that should drive your strategy. So yeah, we totally talk about that.
Awesome.
Yeah. As far as types of categories go, so we generally have 3, and there's a variety of ways to talk about this. I think it's still generally some new information, but I learned it well from seeing some of her name is Ariel Jackson. She's done quite a bit of work in brand with Google and bigger companies like Square and Loom and a lot of companies that were in this stage in order to position themselves, and basically looking at category definitions through the lens of existing, modified, or new. And some of the things that she talked about there, and I would second, is existing is just, hey, this category is very well known, toothpaste, right? Toothpaste is a category that's been around for a very long time, hygiene products, things like that. And the highlight of that, or just what to understand and take away, is that it already exists in someone's mind. They're very familiar with it, and from a brand side, you would play in this category if you're confident that you can win it one day. So if you can do something totally different, or you can do something a lot better than someone else, kind of like 10x the value in that category, be it price, product, whatever it might be, that's kind of the category that you would play within. And then you have modified and new. Modified being like, yes, it's an existing category, but this is probably a bad example, but we just used toothpaste as an example. This might be a chewable tablet for toothpaste. That sounds gross. But in that case, like kind of the example is, okay, people know what toothpaste is. Now we're just tweaking it or changing something about it or innovating the way it's delivered so that we're definitely creating something new, but it certainly relates to something people already have an idea of. We've done this before. We've used toothpaste before. Now it's just in this form, or it's delivered through this, different methodology or whatever that might be. And so likely that's where a lot of businesses that are already established can actually look to innovate and play. They already probably play in an existing category, but anytime you come out with something new or you're looking to differentiate, that might be the area you look to tweak. Like, hey, we already play in this area. How can we invent a product, change our services, shift our process in a way that still lives within this environment, but tweaks the way we deliver it or adds value through doing that? And then the last would be new. This is very much your Airbnb before Airbnb existed, or ride sharing, Uber before Uber ever existed, right? It's inventing, or at least coming out with something that has likely just never been done before. And we'll talk about the consequences or actionable insights to each one of these, but this would be you're totally differentiated. You usually are having to claim you're the first, you're the only, you're the best. But the difficulty with that is relevance, right? How can you actually prove value to what you're doing? Because no one's ever really, no one, they have nothing to go on. No one understands what that is. But yeah, just to summarize, existing, modified, and new are generally the categories that brands play in. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that. I just rambled for quite a while.
No, I really like it. And I think there's kind of that old school thinking of, find a blue ocean, which could be modified or new, but also, I know we'll talk about it a little bit today, but even like you mentioned, relevance when you're coming up with a new category, but even education during your brand process, like you have to educate your audience who you are and what you do. And that's really important to take into consideration as you're defining, how you're going to approach things. And of course, I think the new category is always the one, or modified just seems to be the ones that are most exciting and that people light up when they think about or going after. But you can really win in existing too. But what about go ahead.
No, I was gonna agree with you. Yeah, I think that stuff's good.
But why would you think that it is critical to actually take some time and define it and think through the category and how you're going to approach it?
I think that so it's generally twofold, to just simplify it. The first is that it drives your strategy, right? You really need to know who you're up against, what your audience is doing today. And your category is going to find that. If it's an existing category, it's likely you're probably just coming into you're banging up the walls of clear competitors. So a company like Allbirds, right, very clearly in an existing category of shoes, athletic shoes, right up against Nike and Under Armour and Adidas and all those. Or if you've heard of On Running, same thing. I've been a big fan of their kind of story and how they've differentiated. But I was blown away. How does a company come over and just start taking market share from the likes of a giant like Nike or Adidas or Under Armour? And so there's certainly a strategy. It's like, hey, we have to be highly differentiated from our competitors in a very unique or at least niche way, right? On the other hand, if you're in a new category, and although this like you just said, for tech companies, for product companies, this is the most attractive. It's like, hey, if you can be first. Al Ries said it in the book Positioning, written in the late 80s, which I think was phenomenal. And there's certainly truth to that. If you can be first, it's going to be a lot easier for you to differentiate and stand out. But today, that can also come with a big cost. So you have to understand, if you're first in something, you're not up against a competitor. You actually have to change people's behavior from the status quo or something that they're doing that's very normal to them, and adopting a new idea. And that comes with a whole different set of challenges and costs and expenses. And yeah, that's kind of there's a core difference between really how you're strategizing based on the category that you're playing in, ultimately to just make sure people understand the value that you offer, which is kind of the second part. Helpful to understand your category, necessary to understand your category so that you can help your customers understand who you are and what you do. It's like positioning, by definition, is the space you take up in your customer's mind. Well, if you don't at least have a general idea of the environment you play in, you won't be able to occupy that space as easily in your customer's mind. They're going to have a lot of or lack of clarity about who you are. They don't know how to rank and file you in the system of, oh, these guys do burgers, these guys do shoes, these guys do finance, right? That's how we think of shopping or buying anything really, is categorically. So
sure. I like that.
Yeah. And if you don't do it, they will. Back to my Ariel Jackson example, she gave an example of Patreon, or if you're familiar with Substack, things like that. People started using that early on from her, from what she had shared. And I don't have personal experience with that company, but from what she shared, like people were basically treating it as a friendly tip jar. And really what they wanted it to be was this monetized subscription-based kind of almost SaaS-esque platform, so creators could make monetize their knowledge, their wealth of knowledge. And so they had to reposition their category, I believe, as like a membership platform. You had to become a member of that so that they could drive a little bit more revenue and treat it a little bit more seriously in the eyes of consumers, maybe. And that helped. Like, oh, this isn't a tip jar. This isn't, help a guy that I follow. It's a membership-based platform. I am paying for content on a monthly basis, similar to, the likes of Netflix, just not entertainment or whatever it is. So
Yeah, that's interesting. And even like hearing you talk about, being first to go to market and, what that looks like and how that's important. And even like you're talking about with Patreon, like having to shift their approach and how they position themselves. I think about like, we think about Airbnb as being the first brand to do Airbnb, but in reality, Vrbo was around way before Airbnb, but they had to reposition themselves because they didn't position themselves right in the market to start. And so it's like approaching your category in a way that's really easy for your audience to understand and also kind of like keeps up with what they're looking and wanting is super important.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's why people had a hard time understanding Airbnb for the longest. Like, I don't want to sleep in a stranger's house.
Right.
Until all of a sudden you hit product market fit. And it's like, yeah, why not? Right. But that took, as far as most people who know the story around that know, it was a huge challenge to get people to understand that concept. Right. Mm-hmm. So certainly challenges that come with that too. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, what does it look like in practice? Like, how would you define or explain category and creating one?
Yeah, so like we talked about earlier, like a lot of this, you can say a lot of fun and big words, but it really is simpler than it sounds. It's just using words that you might be familiar with. So, if I said, so we're an agency, right? We're a brand and marketing agency. But if I said, we are a team that drives revenue through the roof by leveraging technology, and that's it, you might be kind of intrigued. Maybe those were a lot of elusive words, not much concrete, but either way, you might be a little bit intrigued, but yet you still don't know like how to categorize what I do, or it's unfamiliar. You're like, okay, so how do you do that? What do you do that in? But if I just said, we're a brand building and growth marketing agency, immediately you know how to categorize me. Okay, I know generally what they do. I know what marketing agencies do. Mm-hmm. And then, yes, you have to differentiate based on that, right? Okay, we're in this category and here's how we do it differently. So that's an existing category and we know that we play in that. On the other hand, if you were in the first one, you'd have to really clarify what that problem solves for if no one exists that does it already. And so usually when you're already in a category, you just want to be clear about that, right? As soon as I say, hey, we're a marketing agency, we're a brand agency, people generally get that. And then it's up to us to help differentiate how we stand out or the value that we provide differently from probably the 10,000 other agencies that play in that space. Yeah. But yeah, that's kind of how I clarify it. And then it also may be appealing. So in practice, right, to always try and get into a new category. But like we've talked about, that certainly has its own challenges. If you can be first in something, certainly a benefit to that, but need to be prepared for how you're going to define that and prove value through that. Like we just talked about Airbnb, you need to be providing clarity around what value this has, what problem it solves, and getting product market fit. That's what product market fit is. Mm-hmm. For anyone watching that, may not know that term, but anyway, it's pretty popularized now. And in a business to business space, one thought I know I picked up on that I certainly have understood from experience is like, especially in a B2B space, companies budget towards certain things. They put budget towards like, hey, we know we need marketing, we know we need this, we know we need that. As more and more categories get created, it's just something to consider that if you're trying to get into a space where budget is allocated and you don't describe yourself the same way that they may have for the past 5, 10, 15, 20 years, it may be harder to get traction there because people, wait, we're paying for what? What are we doing? How are we getting value out of that? Why are we paying for that service? So that's something to consider. It's not all glamorous, and there's certainly a cost that comes with that. Just to prepare for it. So that's an example. That's helpful.
That's awesome. Yeah. Cool. Anything else that we should add?
Just maybe how to think through this is like a simple exercise I I saw and we've used before is company X is a Y that does Z, or we do X for Z type of people, right? Just making it, and that doesn't have to be external language. Obviously, you can change that, but just clarifying like, who are we? What category do we play in? Which category do we want to play in? And again, probably relevant for a lot of startups, but at the same time, if you're in an existing category and company, and you're in a role where you have insight into or leverage into creating products or innovating or involved in any type of product innovation, it's worth looking at. Even though you're already a developed brand, it doesn't necessarily have to be always on the brand level. It could also be in a sub product or sub brand level, where you might want to look at like, hey, we may not be in a new category, but we can certainly create a modified category. In fact, I feel like that's how probably most bigger companies tend to grow, is by modifying the category a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. Creating a need, or creating, a need that people don't even know they have.
Yeah, exactly. Innovation, baby.
This is awesome.
Sure. It's a good time. Thank you, Amanda. Have a
Thank
wonderful
you.
day.
See you later.